James Hetfield was sitting on a tour bus, homesick, missing his girlfriend, holding the phone to his ear with one hand because the other hand had found his guitar. While he talked to her, his fingers started moving across the strings without thinking. Open E, open G, open B, open high E. A simple arpeggio, 4 open strings, the kind of thing a beginner plays on their first day. He hung up the phone and kept playing. And somewhere in the space between missing someone and being unable to say it properly, James Hetfield accidentally wrote the most important song of his career. He never intended to play it for anyone. "I thought that Metallica could only be the 4 of us," he said later. "These are songs about destroying things, headbanging, bleeding for the crowd. As long as it wasn't about chicks and fast cars, even though that's what we liked." He kept the song to himself for months. Then Lars Ulrich heard it. And everything Metallica had spent a decade building, the reputation, the identity, the carefully constructed image of the most dangerous band in America, was about to be tested by 4 open strings and a man who missed his girlfriend. This is the story of Nothing Else Matters, the song James Hetfield wrote for himself. The song Lars Ulrich refused to leave alone. The song that made Metallica the biggest band in the world. And the moment their original fans said they'd lost them forever.
Forever trusting who we are, and nothing else matters.
To understand what Nothing Else Matters meant, you have to understand what Metallica was before it existed. Lars Ulrich was a teenage tennis prodigy from Denmark who fell in love with British heavy metal and moved to California chasing a sound that barely existed in America yet. In 1981, he placed a classified advertisement in a Los Angeles newspaper called The Recycler, looking for musicians who liked the same bands he liked. A shy rhythm guitarist named James Hetfield answered it. Neither of them was particularly good yet. Neither had a band worth the name. The first time they played together, it went nowhere. But something was there. Something that kept pulling them back into the same room. A drummer and a guitarist with nothing but ambition and absolutely no plan for how to turn it into anything real. They added a lead guitarist named Dave Mustaine, then a bassist named Ron McGovney. Then, and this is the moment everything changed, they saw a bassist named Cliff Burton play with a band called Trauma in Los Angeles. Burton played bass like nobody had ever played bass in metal before. He used effects pedals. He played melodic lines that belonged to a lead guitarist. He treated the bass as a voice, not a rhythm section. James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich watched him play and made a decision on the spot. They had to have him. Burton agreed, on one condition. The band had to move north to his world, the San Francisco Bay Area. They moved. No argument, no negotiation, no hesitation. They packed up and relocated an entire band because one bassist demanded it. That tells you everything about who Cliff Burton was, and about what Metallica was willing to do when they believed in something. If stories like this are your thing, hit subscribe. We dig deep into the rise, the fall, and the moment it all went wrong every single week. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Lange, April 11th, 1983. Dave Mustaine woke up with a hangover in a rehearsal facility in New York. Hetfield, Ulrich, and Burton were already awake. They had been planning this moment for days. They had already called a guitarist named Kirk Hammett, who was playing with a Bay Area band called Exodus, and offered him the position. Hammett had already said yes. Mustaine didn't know any of this. At 9 a.m., his 3 bandmates told him he was out. "The thing that really upset me," Mustaine said later, "was that they never gave me a warning and I never got a second chance. It was just, hey man, you're out, see you later." When Mustaine asked what time his flight back to California was, he was told he wasn't flying. He was taking a bus. A 4-day ride from New York's Port Authority terminal to Los Angeles, departing in 1 hour. Hetfield drove him to the station in silence. During that 4-day bus ride across America, furious, humiliated, nursing a hangover that wouldn't quit, Dave Mustaine started writing. He didn't have paper. He wrote on the back of a political leaflet from Senator Alan Cranston. On the front of the leaflet, a line about nuclear weapons read, "The arsenal of Megadeth can't be rid." Mustaine looked at that word, Megadeth. He formed a band, misspelled the name slightly, called it Megadeth, and spent the next 30 years trying to prove that Metallica had made the worst decision in metal history. Meanwhile, Kirk Hammett arrived. Quiet, technically extraordinary, completely different from Mustaine's aggressive, unpredictable style. Metallica entered the studio to record Kill 'Em All. The underground metal scene had never heard anything like it, and something was beginning. Kill 'Em All, 1983. Ride the Lightning, 1984. Master of Puppets, 1986. 3 albums, 3 years. Each one heavier, more complex, more technically extraordinary than the last. Master of Puppets in particular was a statement. A thrash metal album so sophisticated it was being discussed in the same breath as progressive rock. Cliff Burton's bass lines were melodic in ways that had no precedent in the genre. The title track was 8.5 minutes long and didn't care. Metallica were becoming something that couldn't quite be categorized. Too heavy for mainstream radio, too musical for pure thrash, too ambitious for anyone who wanted to keep them small. Then came the night of September 26, 1986. Stockholm, Sweden. The Solnahallen Arena, the final show of the Master of Puppets European tour. After the concert, the band boarded their tour bus for an overnight drive to Copenhagen. The sleeping arrangements needed to be sorted. Kirk Hammett and Cliff Burton drew cards for the preferred bunk. Burton drew the ace of spades. He chose Hammett's bunk. In the early hours of September 27th, in the darkness between towns on a Swedish highway, the bus driver lost control on a patch of black ice. The bus left the road, rolled. Cliff Burton, asleep in the bunk he had won, was thrown through the window. The bus came down on top of him. He was 24 years old. James Hetfield later said he saw the bus lying on its side with Cliff's legs sticking out from underneath. The band stood in a field in rural Sweden in the dark. Their bassist was gone. Their tour was over. Their band, the band that Cliff Burton had helped build into something genuinely extraordinary, would never be the same thing again. Hetfield said simply, "I couldn't imagine replacing him, but I also couldn't imagine stopping." They didn't stop. They kept going. And what came next would prove both the strength and the cost of that decision. Metallica replaced Cliff Burton with Jason Newsted, continued touring, released And Justice for All in 1988, an album so sonically compressed and bass-light that Newsted's contributions were barely audible, a deliberate or subconscious punishment for not being Burton. Nobody has ever given a fully satisfying answer. They were the biggest underground metal band in the world, but underground was the key word. Radio didn't play them. MTV barely acknowledged them. The mainstream music industry treated them like a genre curiosity, extraordinary within their lane but not crossover material. That was about to change. In 1990, Metallica hired producer Bob Rock. Rock had worked with Motley Crue, with Bon Jovi, with The Cult, commercial rock, radio-friendly rock, the exact opposite of everything Metallica had stood for. The existing fan base was suspicious immediately. Then the sessions began. Somewhere on the road between shows, on a tour bus, probably somewhere in America, James Hetfield picked up his guitar and called his girlfriend. He held the phone to his ear. His free hand found the strings, 4 open notes, E, G, B, high E. He kept playing after he hung up. "At first I didn't even want to play it for the guys," he admitted years later. "I thought that Metallica could only be the 4 of us. These are songs about destroying things, headbanging, bleeding for the crowd, whatever it is, as long as it wasn't about chicks and fast cars, even though that's what we liked." He kept the song to himself. It was called Nothing Else Matters. It was a love song.
So close, no matter how far. Couldn't be much more from the heart.
Written by the frontman of the most aggressively masculine band in heavy metal. In secret, because he was afraid of what they would think. Then Lars Ulrich heard it. Kirk Hammett's reaction when Lars played it for him says everything. "All I could think of at the time was, James wrote a effing love song to his girlfriend?" There was a conversation that nobody has ever fully transcribed about whether this was a Metallica song, about whether this belonged on their record, about what it would mean if it did. James Hetfield had reservations. Kirk Hammett had reservations. Lars Ulrich had none. He heard something in that song that the others were too close to see clearly. He heard the next version of Metallica. the one that wasn't underground anymore. Bob Rock felt the same way. It actually changed something culturally, Rock said later. Everybody owned that album. Dentists loved the Black Album. Nothing Else Matters went on the record. And then, something extraordinary happened that nobody expected. Kirk Hammett couldn't play it. The guitarist who had learned Mustaine's parts in days, who had recorded some of the most technically demanding metal guitar work ever committed to tape, could not play Nothing Else Matters. We kept putting it in the set and taking it out until we were certain we were actually able to play it, Hammett said later. I had to relearn that whole intro part to play by myself on stage, which was a little bit intimidating. The song was so unlike anything Metallica had done that their own lead guitarist needed months to learn it. Hetfield recorded every guitar part on the studio version himself. The song that was supposed to be too soft for Metallica became one of the only recordings in their entire catalog that didn't feature Kirk Hammett's guitar at all. August 12, 1991. Metallica, the Black Album, released. No title on the cover, just a black background and a snake in the corner, barely visible. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200. Spent 4 consecutive weeks at the top, went to #1 in 10 countries. Enter Sandman, The Unforgiven, Sad But True, Nothing Else Matters. 5 singles. All of them played on radio stations that had never played Metallica before. MTV, the network that had largely ignored them, now played their videos constantly. The band that Bob Rock had made accessible to dentists had also become the band that teenagers were discovering for the first time. Nothing Else Matters was released as the 3rd single on April 20th, 1992. It peaked at number 11 on the Billboard Album Rock Tracks chart, number 6 on the UK Singles Chart, number 1 in Denmark. Elton John, a man whose opinion on power ballads carries some authority, heard the song and later told James Hetfield to his face that it was one of the best songs ever written. Hetfield was speechless, in tears. The song he had been afraid to play for his own bandmates had moved one of the greatest songwriters alive to declare it a masterpiece. But inside a specific corner of the metal world, the fans who had been there since Kill 'Em All, the reaction was very different. Sellout. That was the word. Not everywhere, not from everyone, but from a passionate, articulate, deeply invested group of fans who felt that the band they had claimed as their own, the band that had refused to make music videos, refused to play radio-friendly songs, refused to compromise for anyone, had just compromised for everyone simultaneously. The Black Album sounded too clean, too produced, too Bob Rock. Nothing Else Matters sounded like exactly what it was, a love song written by a man who missed his girlfriend. And to fans who had headbanged to Battery and Disposable Heroes, a love song from Metallica felt like a violation. The critics who had respected Metallica's refusal to cross over now wrote about their calculated crossover. The underground that had built them felt abandoned. And Metallica, faced with the choice between the fans who had made them and the millions of new listeners who had just found them, made a decision. They kept going. Load in 1996, Reload in 1997, the band cutting their hair, experimenting with country and blues influences, moving further and further from the sound that had made them. Each album feeling like another step away from the band on Kill 'Em All. Then Napster. In 2000, Lars Ulrich became the most hated man in music by suing a file-sharing platform called Napster for copyright infringement. He was legally correct, but the image, a millionaire rock star suing his own fans for sharing music, was catastrophic. The band that had once encouraged bootlegging of their live shows was now taking teenagers to court over downloads. The underground had built Metallica. Metallica had walked away from the underground, and now Lars Ulrich was suing it. Then Some Kind of Monster. A documentary camera crew filmed Metallica spending 2 years and millions of dollars recording one album while simultaneously attending group therapy. Lars and James screaming at each other in front of a therapist. A band so fractured they needed a performance coach named Phil Towell just to be in the same room. The most powerful metal band in the world, unable to make a record without professional psychological intervention. The footage was brutal and honest, and somehow made them more human than anything they had ever recorded. Here is the truth about Nothing Else Matters. It didn't sell out Metallica. It didn't betray their fans. It didn't make them something they weren't. It revealed something they already were, and had been hiding behind distortion and aggression because James Hetfield was afraid to admit it. The man who wrote Battery and Master of Puppets also missed his girlfriend on the road, also felt homesick and vulnerable and unable to say the things that mattered, also had 4 open strings and a feeling he couldn't describe any other way. Nothing Else Matters didn't change Metallica. It showed the part of Metallica they had always kept private. And the fans who called it a sellout were reacting to something real, not because the song was dishonest, but because it was more honest than anything that came before it. The underground that had claimed Metallica as their own didn't want to share them, couldn't bear the idea of a dentist loving the same band they had found in a record shop in 1983. And that feeling, protective, passionate, ultimately futile, is the most rock and roll thing about this entire story. Because Nothing Else Matters is still playing. In stadiums, in films, in the hands of a Finnish cellist quartet called Apocalyptica, who built an entire career covering it with 4 cellos. In Miley Cyrus's voice on a Howard Stern stage while Elton John played piano. The song James Hetfield wrote for himself, in secret, afraid of what his bandmates would think, became one of the most covered songs in the history of popular music. And James Hetfield, the man who thought love songs were a sign of weakness, stood on a stage and cried when Elton John told him it was a masterpiece. That's not a sellout. That's a man who found something true and was brave enough to let Lars Ulrich put it on the record. What's your memory of the Black Album? Did Nothing Else Matters make Metallica or break them? Drop it in the comments. This one is going to start a war. And if you want more stories about the moments that changed music forever, subscribe to What Killed the Band. We'll see you in the next one.